So we're back, video number 15. Today's topic will be finally growth hormone, but we're basing everything on Tony Robbins' Life Force book, and he has this ultimate vitality pharmacy, and there is a list of things that are beneficial for human body and all those kind of things. So we're gonna start from there. So one of them is sermorelin, ipamorelin, MK677. So peptides that, the way they describe it, optimize IGF-1. And how does it even tie to growth hormone? And why would people even go for this instead of growth hormone itself, if this is something that helps you to stimulate it?
Well, so there's some thought
Maybe touch
process.
up a little bit on a history itself. What is growth hormone? Why is it called like that? Because it's somewhat misleading anyway.
Yeah. So historically speaking, growth hormone is it was called somatropic hormone, not growth hormone. And it basically just means that it acts on the somatropic system. What does that mean? It means that it has a lot of interactions with all growth factors, right? And so that's essentially why they changed the name to growth hormone. That's kind of like the really brief, really concise history of growth hormone. But it's really all you really have to know. Like if you knew, the somatropic system and all the other hormones that interact with it, then it can become a little bit more useful of like, oh, these are all the things that actually interacts with. But when you just call it growth hormone, it's hard to really be like, oh, it's tied to all this other family of other hormones. But in essence, that's all what you need to know. It is the somatropic hormone system, and somatropic hormone, growth hormone, is the main one that contributes to all of the cascades. And we're talking things about like basically every single growth factor that you've ever heard of, from epithelial growth factors, vascular growth factors, muscular growth factors like IGF-1, MGF. All of those are made or downstream growth factors of growth hormone itself. So, that basically tells you the growth hormone ties into a lot of systems that are potentially going to be beneficial. Growth hormone and circulating growth, or growth hormone, growth hormone raises circulating IGF-1 versus muscle IGF-1. So there's two forms of IGF-1, circulating IGF-1 and muscular IGF-1. It does not raise muscular IGF-1. It raises IGF-1 that's circulating in your serum. Now, that's a good thing. And that, depending on your diet, can be captured, just like your body has all kinds of other forms to capture circulating testosterone and capture circulating insulin there. And they're all formed from proteins, binding proteins. If you have a large amount of circulating IGF-1 and a large amount of binding proteins, that IGF-1 can now be saved later to be turned into or used for muscular IGF-1 or really anything else, any other growth factors that I mentioned there. So it has those interactions. It is also a mild myostatin inhibitor, and if you've been in the growth space or in the space of bodybuilding or sports, you've probably heard of myostatin inhibitors and things of that nature. And the bowl, there's always the picture of like a bowl.
Yeah, I was about to say, maybe even if you're not in that kind of environment, you probably have seen the photo of really muscular cow or even a dog or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what myostatin inhibitor will do.
Yeah. Or those particular animals had a genetic defect that shut off their myostatin. So growth hormone has that effect. It kind of turns down myostatin inhibition. It's anti-catabolic, which is probably where it shines the most when it comes to sports. So even if you are eating a very low calorie diet, you won't lose much muscle mass because it has direct anti-catabolic effects. At the right dosages, it is neuropredictive, protective, not predictive, protective. Sorry, I have some clear braces on, so my tongue is struggling to keep up with the right words. So anyway, so those are just some of the right things, right?
Well,
That really,
that all applies to more or less athleticism. How is growth hormone tied into ultimate vitality pharmacy, as Tony Robbins calls it? So what? And let's go probably first through ipamorelin, sermorelin, MK677, those kind of things, and how it actually translates into IGF-1, HGH,
yeah,
growth
yeah.
hormone, and how is actually IGF-1 formed in your body by taking these things.
Okay. So as far
What I mean
as
by that, before you continue, does there need to be some kind of lifestyle changes? Does there need some kind of nutritional changes or anything like that to make these things actually work properly? As we discussed previously with testosterone, metformin, you might take these things, but if you don't do everything else, you are literally just waiting for a miracle to happen.
yeah, it's not going to work quite as well for sure. So yeah, there are some circumstances like that around growth hormone, and let's just kind of start with what are these other peptides versus growth hormone, and kind of why I would pick growth hormone in general over one over the other. Now, most of these peptides only stimulate your body. Actually, almost all of the ones that you mentioned, there really isn't a peptide that you take other than growth hormone itself that augments your growth hormone. What I mean by that is ipamorelin, MK677, and some sermorelin. They all stimulate your body's own release of growth hormone. They do this through the ghrelin pathway. What that means is that it's going to make you freaking hungry. Okay. And this is a natural response. You've seen this in children, if you have any children, or, maybe are an aunt or a uncle. You've seen this in young children. They go through spurts where they will devour everything in sight. It doesn't matter what it is. They just eat a lot of damn food, and you're like, what the hell's going on? And then they don't do that forever. They do that for a month or two, and then they all of a sudden grow an inch or 2 months later. And that's has effects, or is directly tied to this system of ghrelin gets raised, hunger gets raised, you eat a lot of food, your IGF-1 goes up, or your growth hormone is being released essentially when ghrelin is high. And then once you've accumulated plenty of growth hormone with plenty of energy substrate food, then the IGF-1 response starts to happen. So we'll get into a little bit of a detail on that, but I want to finish up. That is why that little thing that I just said, it raises your hunger, and that's the way that your growth hormone gets stimulated. That's what these peptides are doing. That's one reason for adults I don't really think, and honestly, really for children, if you, I know some parents, especially parents that are into like basketball and things of that nature, like, what can I do to get my child to grow bigger? And the first thing, they're like, I need to give them some growth hormone. That's a real thing that happens. I'm not really going to go down that rabbit hole, but for adults, the reason why I don't like to go with these stimulating growth hormone stimulating peptides is it's definitely going to increase your hunger. If you're already obese or struggling, or wanting to change your body composition, and you're not in the position to be eating more food and reaching your goal, like maybe you're a skinny person, okay, and you need to eat more food to get to your goal. Now the peptides make more sense, okay, than the growth hormone. Most of the time it's going the other way, right? So that's kind of the delineation that you want to make, as far as, do I want to use peptides or do you want to use growth hormone? And that is, where is your starting point? Are you a really skinny person and you by default need to be eating more food to reach your goal of body composition? If the answer is yes, then perfect. Let's start exploring these peptides. You're probably going to be able to get them prescribed to you easier because doctors are willing to prescribe the peptides basically by asking them. Like they don't actually care because they're peptides and they're not regulated. So
Yeah.
the doctor can literally write you a prescription for epimorelin or samorelin or even MK677 in some case, in, depending on where you live. And those will all raise your hunger and raise your growth hormone. Can you take them in that context for long periods of time, the peptides? And I would say probably not. You probably, because they are functioning on your natural axis of hunger and growth, you probably want to time them appropriately for your goal. Just like in children, they don't eat everything in sight the whole year round. They go in spurts. And the reason is because the body has to prepare for the growth. And so you want to treat it the same way when you're using these peptides.
So you
Now,
need to be more precise. And do I get it right? For example, if you had somebody who hasn't worked out at all,
mhm,
and now their health is a little bit iffy. Doctor has done blood checks and everything, and they say, "Hey, you know what? You would be good if you were to increase your muscle mass because you're in your 50s. It's much harder to grow your muscle, and this is where these peptides would be really beneficial for someone like that, who has
yeah,
probably looking after themselves already, eating really healthy, but been running all over the place. And now we know that muscle is also almost as an organ. The more lean tissue you have, well, not excessively more, but definitely same weight body with more lean muscle tissue will be much healthier than someone who has more adipose tissue. So in that
absolutely.
case, these would be better choice than nothing.
Yeah, yeah. And then, go back to our previous episode. Maybe in your case, in that specific age demographic, if your body composition is not favorable, you have a BMI of 28, but your body fat percentage, if you're a male, is, 22, the peptides probably aren't going to be what I suggest right off the
Mm.
bat. Go back to the previous two episodes. That's probably where I would start. Something like testosterone with metformin. Let's increase the muscle mass through a different vector that doesn't make you hungry, like right
Yeah.
out of the gate, as far as the peptides. Now, if you told me, hey, I have a doctor that's willing to prescribe me growth hormone and testosterone, now you're cooking, because what I was going to lead to, the major difference when you start taking growth hormone versus these peptides is that growth hormone does not raise your hunger. In fact, it will lower your hunger if you are taking it to a replacement dose, something like
Mm.
2 IUs.
Right.
Between 1 and 2, there's a lot of data out there that kind of suggests, because it's hard to measure. Like, that's the thing about growth hormone. That's the reason why athletes are really into it, is because it's hard to detect. They have to basically catch you in the act of using it to be able to detect it. So that's also makes it problematic for literature to kind of find out, like, what does a healthy male produce? And the best you can kind of nail it down is a healthy 20-year-old. I don't really know if those exist anymore, but a healthy 20-year-old with great hormone system in general, right? All their hormones is probably going to produce somewhere close to 2 IUs of growth hormone per day. Uh, and now a 40-year-old, so now you've doubled their age, a 40-year-old is probably not going to be able to produce 2 units. They're probably going to produce slightly above one.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference. So if you go to, just like in the testosterone discussion, you want to replace it to the top of the range of the young cohort. That's going to be as best optimal when it comes to
Mm.
lifestyle, increasing longevity, that sort of stuff. So my default is somewhere around 2 units of growth hormone is going to be about upper range replacement. You're definitely going to feel it if you're an older person, as far as like, hey, I feel better, I rest better, I recover better, joints, tendons, ligaments feel a little bit better, that sort of stuff. Skin and hair and nails grow back a little bit faster, that sort of thing. You're going to notice that at 2 units. Now, taking 2 units of growth hormone will not raise your ghrelin, because growth hormone comes after the fact of that system being elevated. If you take it directly, you're actually down regulating hunger, because
Mm.
now ghrelin never had to be secreted. And then your body registers, hey, this guy's got plenty of growth hormone. We don't need to raise hunger. So growth hormone is actually lowering your hunger when you administer it by itself. So if
So,
some, go
but
ahead.
you probably your doctor will know this. So why would they prescribe these substances instead of growth hormone itself?
Because they can't prescribe growth hormone because that is an off-label use for
Right.
hunger. Okay, so that's the thing about a doctor. They may know these things. Just because they know them, they also have a license to practice, which
Mm.
means if they don't obey the laws in that particular, for example, in England and the United States, they probably can't prescribe it for that situation. But if you go to India or any other place where maybe the laws are much looser, especially around anabolics, Thailand, things of that nature, you're probably going to be able to go into the pharmacy and just buy it yourself without a prescription. Or like in Mexico, they
And
can
Mexico comes in place. We just walk in
yeah,
and
yeah.
buy two and get three for free.
Yeah, yeah, but even in Mexico, you go to a doctor's office in Mexico, they will be able to prescribe you growth hormone for a lot of the things that I just mentioned. Whereas in America and anywhere in the EU, they're going to be a little bit harder on them to just be able to prescribe
Yeah.
growth hormone for these things.
Yeah.
But the doctors know, okay, growth hormone does these things. Hopefully, a peptide that stimulates growth hormone also does these things. But it does do a lot of the things that growth hormone does, but it does not bring hunger down. That's the
Yeah.
one thing that's going to separate peptides from growth hormone when it comes to basic decision making process of which ones do I choose. Right.
So let's say you're somebody who was trying to build muscle, you're really going to benefit from these peptides. And if you are somebody who is trying to build muscle but already way out of shape, you probably should stay away from it until you get in a better shape and better position where you can
Yeah.
utilize them,
Yeah.
unless
Well,
you can get growth hormone itself.
correct. Right. Yeah. So in that case, if you can get growth hormone, yes, that one will be beneficial, not the peptides. If you can't, then stay away from the peptides. They're going to make the road harder.
Get in
Start.
shape, ready
Yeah.
for it. So, what would you say are necessary lifestyles to make these peptides work the best, growth hormone works the best? And obviously, we want to touch up on some kind of side effects and things that might scare people off. And I think
Yeah.
that links in great with lifestyle changes.
Okay, yeah. So this goes into play with how does growth hormone raise IGF-1? Because that's really what we're after, right? Growth hormone can definitely make you lose some body fat directly, right? It stimulates the release of adipose tissue for energy for building later, okay? And that's one of the reasons why growth hormone itself will reduce hunger and reduce body fat. And both peptides and growth hormone will, by default, raise your IGF-1 and growth factors. So they both do the growing thing fairly okay. You're not going to notice major amounts of growth on 2 units of growth hormone or any amount of peptide. I will say that up front. If you're taking growth hormone or growth hormone secreting peptides for the act of growing a lot of muscle tissue, you're not going to get that at replacement doses. Whereas testosterone, even at replacement doses, if you're taking it to the upper range, you're probably going to see some manifestation of growth in the first 6 to 7 months easily, especially if you go back and kind of look at the previous episode where it's like, hey, if you lined up your testosterone use and your training and your diet to periodize with the season of the year, you're going to find that at a certain season of the year, in about 3 or 4 months, you do grow 3 or 4 pounds right away. And you're like, oh, that was pretty great. Growth hormone is probably not going to set you up quite like that. This is more of a longevity type protocol for mainly for joints, soft tissues, things of that nature, hair, nails, skin, that sort of thing. And it will improve sleep only. Okay, this is where the lifestyle thing starts to play in. Okay, only if you are actually accurately telling your body what time of day it is. I say that because your body in modern society can't tell time with clocks and watches and all of that, right? And we've talked about this, so I won't get into a lot of detail, but if you're not somebody who's actively going outside at certain periods of the day, then it doesn't matter how much growth hormone you're taking, you're still going to get shitty sleep. You get a shitty sleep even with a lot of growth hormone. Well, growth hormone isn't able to do all the things that it does, right? Some of these things depend on you going to sleep, period. Okay. So if you're not sleeping well, or it's one of those things where when you do sleep, your REM sleep is absolute shit, or your deep sleep is absolute shit, either one of those two, then yeah, you're going to struggle to gain benefit from growth hormone in the longevity game, especially in the neuroprotective side of growth hormone, because growth hormone, like I said, influences all the growth factors, even brain growth factors like BDNF and GDNF. Okay, it does influence
Which is
those.
probably more applicable for Asian people as well.
Absolutely. Aging people, people that are always cognitively or mentally working, right? Like that's their job. Hey, I need to be a statistician or somebody who handles multiple businesses at once, that sort of stuff, right? You are probably going to benefit from growth hormone in the sense of it's neuroprotective. It's going to make, hopefully, if your lifestyle is right, it's going to make sleep better. It's going to make recovery from your brain intense job a lot better, that sort of stuff. But it all starts with your lifestyle. That's the thing that a lot of people kind of mess up with hormones in general is hormones do not change your lifestyle for
Mm.
the better. Hormones usually augment lifestyle if it's good, and if the lifestyle is already bad, all hormones, not just growth hormone, all hormones can give you a little bit of leeway and a little bit more motivation and a little bit more resiliency to change your lifestyle. But if you don't change your lifestyle and you take a bunch of growth hormone, take a bunch of testosterone, what you're going to end up doing is you actually shorten your lifespan
Yeah,
because
and this is the main reason why we started this series the way we did. Change your lifestyle, check where you're at, make sure all these habits are in place. And when everything is laid out, you should already get really amazing results. That's why we call it becoming a superhuman, because let's be honest, people are just so unhealthy now. And these little changes can literally change the way you feel, the way you look, the way you think, all those kind of stuff. And then when you add this on top, it starts making sense.
right, right, because now you don't have things to worry about. Like what? Okay, so let's bring up one of the major side effects that I get that people bring up when you say, "Hey, growth hormone is beneficial." They go, "Well, what about cancer?" Right? Because everybody will read studies and everybody will read about growth hormone,
Yeah.
which they should. Um, they should read about all these things on their own with all the different information out there. But one of the things that will come up with growth hormone is an augmented risk of cancer. What does that mean? It does not mean that it causes cancer. What it means is it has raised all growth factors. That includes growth factors that are going to make cancer cells grow faster.
Hmm.
So if you have cancer or have lifestyles that predispose you to cancer, you should think twice about growth hormone or even the peptides. The peptides are in the same boat here because they are raising your body's own natural production of growth hormone. The peptides, I will say this, you're probably not going to go be able to keep your body elevated at super physiological production for very long. And that's why I say the peptides need to be timed correctly and need to be set up correctly for your goal. And so, we could get into that if somebody actually wanted to know more about that, but that's the basics of that. Um, and in that short time frame, you will be predisposed to having more growth factors. That's the whole point. And that will elevate your cancer risk if you happen to go into that phase with cancer already, or a lifestyle that augments the possibility of cancer. Now, I'm going to say something that there's a study out there that shows this definitively across every single possible disease, and that's this: sun exposure decreases all cause mortality. It's very important to understand all those words. It means that every single way that a person can die, this includes all cancers, this includes diabetes, this includes heart disease, this includes every single thing you can think of, except for acute damage. So, in other words, an accident, a car accident, they excluded those things. Any other disease like state that can cause you to die early is improved linearly by sun exposure. So what does that mean? That means the more outside time you get, the less all these other diseases happen, including the cancers, including the heart risk, including the diabetes. Okay.
So this is another argument for those who go, well, why can't I just go to the gym and get on a treadmill, or do something in between my office hours in the office?
Yeah, it's, it goes right back to all the videos before this. Every time I say go for a walk, every time I say you need to get outside and get some daylight, these are minimums that I'm talking about, right? Ideally, when I'm coaching somebody, I want them more and more outside.
Yeah.
Just that simple. You offset major risk. And this study didn't, and then you go, okay, well, what if I'm taking drugs? Well, in my personal opinion, if you're taking drugs, that's raising certain risks. You should do everything you can to minimize those risks. If you already have a study that clearly says the more sun you get, the less of these risks you get, then you should take full advantage of that, especially when you start dealing with long-term use of replacement growth hormone. Think of it this way: you are aging, which means that cancer can become more and more prevalent, right? Before this block of time, this point in time where we're at right now, and 20 years earlier, before that time, cancer of all forms was significantly less. And the further back in time you travel, the less it is, right? Most people argue the diagnostics are better now, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is more people are actually dying of cancers. So I don't give a crap about the diagnostics argument. The simple fact is more people are dying and they're being taken by cancer, period. Okay. So that's irrelevant of whether they were diagnosed or not. Maybe somebody dies with cancer. They didn't even know they had cancer. That happens a lot more than you think these days than 30, 40 years ago. And the major shift that you have to conclude is, well, more and more people are spending almost their whole entire life inside. I know people like that. I know people that don't go outside, period.
Oh, and yeah, a lot.
Yeah, that's not abnormal. That is the normal these days, especially in America, especially in the EU, or countries.
I would say more advanced countries.
Yeah. In developed countries, the more developed the country is, the more technology the country has, the more inside time you see from people. Even though there are steps, like I have people spend all day inside, 19,000 steps. I'm like, it's not about the steps. It just isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very hard to break that belief, because, like, when I was working in the gym, I was doing 15, 20,000 steps a day. I was not fit. I was not healthy. I was not lean.
No.
Like, dude, I had to go and do specific things to keep my health in check.
Yeah. And steps is not it. Steps keeps you active. Like, I'm not saying that you can't have decent composition if your activity level is high enough. That does not mean that you are healthy at a cellular level. So, having said that, one of the major contributors with lifestyle that you need to ensure when you're taking growth hormone or any of these peptides is getting outside enough. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on why. Okay. One of the major regulators of cancer cells, or basically the major regulator, is apoptosis. Okay. That's cell suicide. Okay. Now, that gets regulated at cytochrome 4. That's where oxygen gets made and water gets made. Okay. There's a lot of details on how those feed back to correct apoptosis structure. But what you got to understand is this: there are 4 chromophores in cytochrome 4. That all 4 of those are red light detectors. In other words, infrared light from morning sunlight programs cytochrome 4 to do the right QED of your energy production system. UVA, which only happens in the morning or in the evening, not in the middle of the day, interacts with your vascular system at the skin level to produce nitric oxide. Nitric oxide gets fed into the chain of oxygen going through the electron transport chain. It means that when nitric oxide is present, cytochrome 4 should detect a voltage drop, because nitric oxide does not create ATP and water when it gets put into the system, right? Think of it like a monkey wrench that gets thrown into the system. It's a test, okay? So your cytochrome 4 is programmed by infrared A light, and UVA light creates nitric oxide. That means if you get morning sunlight, you tell cytochrome 4 what to detect, and you throw the monkey wrench in the system. If the cell responds subpar compared to other cells, that cell gets marked for apoptosis. That's killing that cell. If it was a potential cancerous cell, then it's going to get killed. Simple as that. That's how you get rid of cancer in the natural way. That's what your body is meant to do. If you consistently miss ARA and UVA light, well, guess what happens? You never program cytochrome 4 to detect a voltage drop, and you never throw the monkey wrench in there to test the system. Your cells never get tested. This is the start of when a cancerous cell, or any cell that's not even cancerous yet, starts to care more about energy than information. Because what I just mentioned about detection and the monkey wrench, that's information. That's information for the cell to go, this mitochondria responded appropriately to our stress test. It's good to go. It lives another day. This mitochondria did not respond appropriately to our stress test. We need to mark it for autophagy, repair, or apoptosis, recycling, cell suicide, right? That is how the cell gets the information of which cells need to be destroyed, which cells need to be repaired, and which cells can be left alone. Okay. Cancer is when a cell starts to care about energy and not information, so it only replicates, but it's dysfunctional. In other words, it's just creating a bunch of energy, but it's not creating any useful contribution to the organism. That's because it no longer carries correct information. That correct information is embedded in the cell by sunlight. Okay. So if you're worried about taking growth hormone and you're worried about cancer risk, you should not ever skip morning sunlight, because that's going to program your cells to take care of the cancer risk for you. The more, the better, right? So if you can't live a lifestyle, or you happen to live somewhere where certain times of the year you cannot live a lifestyle where you get outside in the morning, then it starts to periodize your growth hormone usage for you, right? If you obey those laws and you're like, I'm only going to take growth hormone when I'm able to get outside a lot of time, or most of the time, daily, then that's when you take growth hormone. Maybe for you, it's 6 months out of the year. Or maybe it's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to start taking it in early spring, right when the weather starts to change good for me. And I get outside every morning and I can take it for 7 months. That's a good stint run of growth hormone at the replacement dose to kind of restore longevity, restore vitality. And then maybe when you're feeling that well, you can make better decisions of like, you know what? Maybe I want to live somewhere where I can take growth hormone without repercussion for longer periods of time. Or, maybe that's strategically how it works out for you, where in the winter, you don't really need the growth hormone support. There's lots of ways to skin that cat, but I needed to elucidate the risk and what the obvious solution is if you are worried about that risk.
Yeah, and this is why it's so important to understand that even though you have this like list of things you can take, that doesn't mean you should be taking them, and it doesn't mean they're going to be beneficial for you unless you are already priming your physiology to actually be kind of receiving, in the sense that everything that you do excessively with exogenous intake of any kind of supplement is benefiting you rather than making you worse. Because
Correct.
what you just described, if you don't go out for a walk, if you don't go do these things, it's just going to backfire on you and you're going to run into some kind of issues.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Especially if you plan on taking it long term and you are long term not doing these lifestyle habits, and long term you're increasing your growth factors. Then if you do get a cancerous cell in the middle of all that, something that can multiply into a tumor, well, now you've exponentially increased the growth rate of cancer or a tumor. You see what I'm saying? So you don't want to put yourself in hot water unnecessarily, right?
And it's not just that. Even when we talked about nutrition, if you don't get your physiology geared up to get you deal better with more carbs, or deal better with this or that, you're just wasting your time on this nutritional approach because it's not geared up for your lifestyle. It's just not going to work.
Yeah. So now I'll feed into a little bit of like how nutrition and priming yourself to deal with carbs for growth hormone itself, or even the peptides. So remember, the final thing that we're really looking for is IGF-1. And that means that we want really high IGF-1 binding proteins. Those are augmented by a high carbohydrate diet. But what if you haven't been able to change your lifestyle to handle high carbohydrates? Well, in that case, the growth hormone that you take is not going to cause the same amount of IGF-1. You'll have to take exponentially more, which exponentially increases other risks, right?
Yeah.
So if you want the benefit, the final benefit, which is what we want, high IGF-1 numbers, you need to be combining that with a high carbohydrate intake, right? Now, when is your physiology going to be most primed for a high carbohydrate intake? Just from a natural perspective, it's when you're getting a lot of sunlight, period. Okay. Your body's actually going to be able to process and handle more carbohydrates when you get a lot of sunlight. If that's seasonally for you, then it's seasonally. You don't really have control of that. These are not my rules. These are nature's rules. It's that simple, right? Now, maybe you live somewhere where you can eat carbohydrates all year round. Excellent. Well, now growth hormone starts to be more appealing to you, right? It starts to check more boxes because more than likely, if you're getting outside and you live somewhere where carbohydrates are abundant because of high sunlight hours and you have high sunlight hours, well, now at the base level, you're set up for lots of carbohydrates, lots of potential IGF-1 if you introduce growth hormone. If you're somebody who's by default needing to eat lower carbs because you're unable to handle high carbohydrates, or you're in a season where you can't handle quite as many, then you want to pair your growth hormone use accordingly because the end factor is IGF-1. That doesn't mean you can't use small replacement doses year round. It just means don't expect a lot of reward from the IGF-1 side until your diet and lifestyle change to match up. Just like I mentioned with the testosterone, there's going to be certain times of the year where it sets you up to grow better versus other times of the year. Growth hormone is no different, and it follows these light and eating cycles.
Yeah. So long story short, get your basics right, and then you can start looking into these. If you are someone on a skinnier side, then peptides would be a great choice. If you're someone whose physiology is not yet where it needs to be to optimally grow muscle, ideally would be if you could find some kind of growth hormone, but only after your habits and everything else are in check.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
No, David, thanks for your time again. We're going to wrap this up. We're not going to extend it as usual. Thanks for your time, and we're going to catch up on next video.
Awesome. Thank you.